Hello, I'm Iqbal and welcome to the Teak Talk podcast brought to you by the Sikh Welfare Council, also known as SIWEC. In Punjabi, Teak Talk means all well or all good. It's common to ask people if everything is Teak Talk when we meet them. In this podcast series, we want to take what it means to be all well and all good seriously. We want to focus on an aspect of our health that we often don't pay enough attention to and very often don't know how to pay attention to. I'm referring to mental health. Now, I'm not an expert on issues related to mental health, but I have a number of questions and I'm eager to learn. In this podcast series, I will be speaking with a number of experts. Over the coming weeks, experts will discuss issues ranging from mental health issues that we face as a community to stress amongst the youth. We will also discuss resources that are available to all of us. Hello and welcome to another episode of Teak Talk. In today's podcast, we will be discussing the issue of understanding family violence, and we are privileged to be able to speak with Nazima, who is a lead social worker at PAVE Integrated Services. Hello and welcome back to the Teak Talk podcast. Today we are going to be discussing the issue of domestic violence, and we're doing things a little differently. You may notice from the podcast that our backdrop is of a different color. Usually we have a red curtain, today we have a blue curtain. That is because we are actually filming it offsite. We are at PAVE and we are delighted to have with us Nazima, who works as a social worker at PAVE. And she's an expert on the issue. One of the issues she's an expert on is domestic violence and domestic abuse. Now, Nazima, welcome to the Teak Talk podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm sure we'll have a good discussion on this issue. Before talking about the issue of domestic abuse itself, could I start by asking you a little bit about what you do and a little bit about PAVE as an organization?
Okay, sure. So I'm a social worker at PAVE. And PAVE is a protection specialist center, and we deal with issues of family violence. So we work with survivors of violence, perpetrators of violence, as well as vulnerable family members who have witnessed, who have been involved in incidents of violence. So that's one of the core work that we do, the direct casework and counseling with this vulnerable group of people. Then we also do trainings for professionals, members of the public to raise awareness about violence. We do research. Actually, we do a lot of things. Yeah.
And then a lot of very important things, I might add.
Yes.
And what brought you to focus on this aspect of social work?
On family violence specifically.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is my first and only job. So I was interested in, after my O-levels, many years ago, I got into volunteering in a girls' home, and I was also volunteering in a hospital. So I interacted with some social workers, and I was quite intrigued by the work that they do. So I was quite sure that after Polytechnic, I was going to do my degree in social work. So that's what I did. And when I was in NUS, that's where I met Dr. Sudanaya, who is the founder of PAVE as well as our CEO. Yeah, and she's a very inspiring and passionate social worker and professor. So when she offered me a job, then I jumped at it, even though I had no clue about family violence. And I'm still here after 10 years.
And I'm glad you're here because you're doing very important work.
Thank you.
And you know, it's apart from being important work, it's also you work in a field in which people don't talk about it very much, right? And that's one of the things I want to get into about this podcast is how do we talk about domestic abuse? How do we create awareness about it and what we can do in situations in which we find it arising? But before that, right, just for people out there like myself who are ignorant about categories and who are not very sure about what fits into the term domestic abuse, could you describe what sort of issues and matters fall into this category? And could you also maybe just highlight a little bit about misconceptions that exist about domestic abuse.
Okay, so domestic abuse is quite a complex issue, and you're right, it's not talked about often. There's still a lot of shame and stigma that surrounds it. So when people think about violence and abuse, people usually think about physical violence, right? The hitting, punching, slapping. But domestic abuse, family violence is more than just the physical abuse. There's the emotional and psychological abuse where somebody belittles you, criticizes you, humiliates you, gaslight you. There's also the sexual abuse, financial abuse, and a lot of times we also see a lot of controlling and coercive behaviors, isolating you from family and friends, trying to intimidate you by throwing things, making threats. So it's a broad range of behaviors, and it's not just what people usually think about, that it needs to be, I need to see bruises on you lah. Then you're considered like a victim of family violence. That's one of the misconceptions actually. Yeah.
I think that's a very important point, and you phrased it very well, right? That I need to see, people think that I need to see bruises for it to fall into the category of domestic abuse. Can I ask you to just develop a little bit about, you mentioned that there are various facets to domestic abuse. You mentioned emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse. Could you give some examples of what these could be?
Sure. So we see usually that abuse doesn't just happen, happen out of nowhere. Usually there's a pattern. There's an escalation. It starts with a partner or a family member being controlling, for instance, telling you what to do, what to wear, who you can talk to, who you can't talk to, controlling how you manage your finances, controlling how much money he gives you or she gives you. And then it may escalate to a little bit of the verbal abuse, putting you down, telling you that you're not good enough, that because of you, that's why he's acting this way. And then progressively, it may escalate to the use of physical violence or even more severe violence. We also see a lot of cases of stalking, partners who stalk their partners or their spouses, tracking them using now technology, right? You can track everybody at any time, anywhere. That's also one way. I mean, the aim of the violence is really to intimidate, to cause fear, and to have power over you. Yeah, that's the whole idea of domestic abuse.
And that also makes me think that it's not necessary for it to be manifest as physical violence.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So more and more we are seeing cases where there's no physical violence actually. Yeah, but it's a lot of this controlling and coercive behaviors. And it's hard for the survivors to get help because people don't believe. People will be like, huh? But he's so nice. Yes. He treats you so nicely. He buys you so many things. And I'm saying he because many of the cases that we see, the persons who abuse are men. And I mean, research has also shown that majority of perpetrators are men. Yeah. So that's the only reason why I'm referring to men here. But yes, it's not always the case where there needs to be physical violence. Yeah.
And just for clarity purposes, you mentioned the term gaslighting. This is a term that the younger generation knows. Some people from my generation and beyond don't know it. Could you explain what that is?
So it's making you feel like, you are the crazy one. Manipulating you to feel that you are to blame. Yeah, they have this way of making you feel like it's your fault. Yeah, that whatever that has happened, it's because of you. Yeah. So it puts the survivors in a constant state of confusion, anxiety, fear, because they are very confused lah. Is what he is doing to me, is it something wrong? Is it something disrespectful, or is it really my fault? So yeah.
Okay. So they start to think about how they can change their behavior.
Yeah. and they blame themselves for the behaviors of their partners, for instance. Yeah.
Another question that would be useful to hear about is also, we often, when we think about at least when I think about domestic abuse, I think about partners and spouses, but it's also the broader family, right?
Yes, that's right.
That's also.
Yeah. So at PAVE, the majority of our cases are the co-occurrence cases. What this means is that there is violence perpetrated by the husbands towards the wives, and there are children involved, and children are witnesses to the violence. So we call this co-occurrence cases. But beyond that, we see cases where there's elder abuse, there's sibling abuse. Sibling abuse meaning not young siblings, but maybe 30-something, 40-something, 50-something, using violence on each other.
Yes.
We see adult children abusing their older parents, but these parents are younger than 65 years old. Yeah.
Younger than 65.
Yeah. So we don't term that as elder abuse yet.
I see.
Yeah. So maybe like for example, like me in my 30s abusing my parents who are in their late 50s, for instance. Yeah. So we see that quite often as well. Yeah. And then of course like intimate partner, like they are not married, cohabiting or in a relationship, and then there's abuse as well. We also see the vulnerable adults. So basically it's like from birth to death lah, that kind. The whole gamut lah that we see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it the case that there's a history to this, or is it usually just flare up at a certain point of time? What's your experience with dealing with cases of domestic abuse?
For us, when we talk about domestic violence, we see it as not incident-based, but rather a pattern, a systematic pattern that has happened over a period of time. And that's usually the case for many of the families that we see. It did not just happen. For some families, it started when the couple were dating, and then it just progressively got worse. Some during the dating period, it was fine, things were rosy, and then when they got married, when they got children, when there are a lot of stresses, and then things happened. So we usually don't say that it just happened. There's usually a pattern to it. Yeah.
And the pattern doesn't have to be sort of physical only. It can be emotional, leading to physical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for some people, or for many people, they don't know that is abuse.
Yes.
Like when you are dating and someone is always asking, where are you going? Hey, why are you wearing that? Hey, not nice. Like, hey, I don't like boys seeing you wearing that. You would think like, oh, he's so in love with me. He's so caring and all that, right? But it may not be that, so people may not know. Yeah.
Actually, that leads to my another question that I had was that, many people out there might say that, if someone is a victim of domestic abuse, why don't they just get up and leave? Why stay in this relationship? Especially if there's it's always a pattern, or generally a pattern, and it's manifesting in various forms. Why do they stay?
Okay. Firstly, at PAVE, right, we call them survivors. We don't call them victims.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
No,
it's telling you.
I'm glad you corrected me on that, because I think that's an important point to note.
Yeah, because we have the misconception that they are helpless, they are powerless, they are stuck in their situations. But we also have to remember that they have been surviving for a long time. They know their situation the best. And sometimes asking them to leave can be even more dangerous. And so when somebody wants to leave an abusive relationship, that's when the risk is even higher, because the perpetrator may change their tactics, may escalate in their behaviors to keep their spouses or family members with them. Yeah, they may stalk, they may use even more severe forms of violence. And there are a lot of considerations and barriers for survivors to leave sometimes. There's thinking about the children. A lot of people think, I want my children to have a complete family. I don't want a broken family. I don't want them to live without their father. And then there's also the financial dependence. Some of the survivors are financially dependent on the men, on their spouses or partners. So it's hard. Yeah. And they don't know where to start. Yeah. And we also have to remember that it's not every day that the relationship is filled with violence. There are good times. Yeah. And during those good times, some of the survivors we meet also talk about their hopes that their partners can change, their love for their partners, and that belief that, their families can be better. Yeah. There's also a lot of shame and stigma in our society, talking about violence and wanting to seek help, step out, tell people about what's happening in your family. We may say that, we are in 2024 already and, people are more open and all that, but you may be surprised that some people are still quite hesitant to speak up. And quite afraid of, the repercussions in the community or in their families if they were to walk away from a relationship. Yeah.
Actually, that's you made a number of very important points. One, I appreciate the fact that you highlight that we should call them survivors rather than victims. I think that's very important for us to change our mindset as well about how we think about this. And the stigma associated with it, and the stigma of just talking about it is a problem. Right? People don't really talk about domestic abuse in their family settings, etc. Now, I'll come back to that, but just want to follow on from something you mentioned earlier about the sort of impact and the various ways it impacts an individual. Could you talk a little bit about, from your experience of dealing with survivors, how are they affected by this beyond the actual just the abuse that they are? Is their everyday life affected beyond this? But also the children in this marriages, because often the idea is that you continue in the relationship because of children. But how are the children affected? Do you have any engagement in that level?
Yeah, we see a lot of children in our cases because we also believe that it's important to work with the entire family. It's not just the survivors who need help. The children need help. The perpetrators, or actually here we call them persons who abuse because they are people first, people with bad behaviors, so they also need help because they are the only ones who can stop the violence. They use the violence. They are the only ones who can stop the violence, and they are the only ones who can create safety in the house. So going back to your question about the impact on the survivors, I think it's on many levels. Like emotionally, of course, like I said, there's that constant fear and anxiety. It's like walking on eggshells at home. You don't know what might cause an explosion. So that feeling of being hyper vigilant, having to tiptoe around the house, trying to keep peace in the house, that's really tiring. That takes a toll, on a person. It also affects a person's sense of self-worth. Yeah, when you hear repeatedly that, you're not good enough, you're not a good mother, you're not a good wife, you can't satisfy me, can't do your responsibilities, it affects them, right? Yeah, some of the women we see also have post-traumatic stress symptoms or disorders. They're depressed. So there's a lot of impacts on work, their ability to concentrate in work, to give their focus at work. Sometimes because of the partner's very controlling behaviors, they can't even go to work. They can't be independent. So there's a lot of various impacts. Of course, when there is physical violence, then there is that physical injury, there's that chronic pain, and all that is also damaging.
And what about the children that you dealt with? What sort of factors? I mean, I can imagine, but I'd like to hear.
Yeah. So we see children as young as babies lah. Yeah. But of course, we do the more therapeutic work for those about 4 years and above, where we provide them with counseling, with therapy, to help them deal with their experiences of witnessing the violence at home. So for these children, there's a lot of impact also. One is also that sense of helplessness or powerlessness, right? Like when something happens between my mom and dad, I don't know whether should I intervene, how can I protect my mom? So there's a lot of that feeling of confusion, and feeling of like split loyalty lah, He's my dad, but this is my mom. Who do I side? So I mean, it's very confusing for children. Yeah, that's one. Some of the kids also present with post-traumatic stress symptoms, hypervigilance, having nightmares, flashbacks, cannot concentrate in school because they're worrying what's happening at home, when they leave mom at home with dad. We see a lot of that. Grades are affected. Yeah, some kids become aggressive themselves because that's what they learn, right? That's what they think that it's normal or it's okay to solve problems using violence or using aggression. So that's what they do. So they get into trouble in school. They talk back to teachers. They fight with their friends. So we see that as young as children in primary school, sometimes. Yeah, and then we have the opposite end of kids who withdraw. Don't want to talk. Don't want to tell others what they're thinking and feeling. So they withdraw from friends, from peers, from activities. So that's also concerning lah. Yeah, but I have to say that kids are very resilient, and with like early intervention, when families do seek help and families agree for us to see their children, usually children can overcome this. Yeah, it's not only about them seeing social workers and receiving therapy, but also the supportive adults at home, other supportive adults, aunties, uncles, grandmothers, who are important in their lives, who are supportive, who can also provide that nurturance and that stability. And then schools also play an important role. So we see that with all these factors, children can overcome some of these very damaging effects lah. Yeah. You ended that on highlighting the role that supportive adults, family, friends, or near ones and dear ones can play. I'm curious because how I want to ask you about how people can help, but before how people can help, how can people tell that something is going on? Because it's like you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily about physical bruises. Yeah.
So are there any red flags, early signs that we should be attentive to if something like this happening in our close circle?
Yeah. So number one is, of course, the obvious one, like if you see physical injuries, unexplained bruises, cuts, burns at like very suspicious places on the children, on other family members, then you want to be a bit more curious. And ask a bit more lah, what happened. And sometimes the answer is a bit like iffy or a bit suspicious. Then you also want to be a little bit more curious and ask a bit more. Yeah, because they may want to hide, right? Yeah, because it may also be dangerous for them if the perpetrators know that somebody else knows. So that's one obvious way, obviously. And then of course if you notice a family member who's becoming more isolated, previously was outgoing, was very assertive, will join in for events or social activities, family gatherings, but now not doing any of these things, always with the partner, that's also a sign. Yeah. And then if you see that partners seem very controlling, in the way that they are always standing beside the spouse or the other partner, like cannot the partner cannot be alone, that kind, and the partner is nervous or jittery around his or her spouse, then that's also a sign lah to watch out for. Yeah.
And what if somebody is picking up these signs in their family or close friends? What do they do? What should they do?
They shouldn't jump to conclusion that it's violence lah. That's number one. Yeah, because we don't know what's happening, right? Yeah, but if our gut is telling us that something's not right, then I would say talk to the person lah. Find an opportunity to talk to the person on her own. Without the partner, and just offer that space that, hey, I'm here to listen, to help. If you need any forms of help, you can always come to me. Yeah, you don't want to pressure them lah to tell you. Yeah, because if they're not ready to do anything, right, or they're not ready to seek help, then when you pressure them, your efforts might just backfire lah. Yeah, so
they might close.
Yeah, they might close up and they might hide even more. Yeah. So just offering that space that, you're here, you're worried, you notice certain things, and, you just want to check in. Is everything okay? Yeah. If you need help, like, you can always come to me. Yeah. And then with the children, of course, just talk to the kids. Kids sometimes they tell everything. Yeah.
Stigma doesn't affect them that much, right?
Yes. Yeah. So if you have a good relationship with your nieces, nephews, grandchildren, then ask them, how are things at home? Don't ask like very specific leading questions lah, but finding out how things are at home, if everything's okay, is there something that you need to tell me? If there's anything that you need help with, please know that you can come to me. Yeah, so providing that kind of supportive space for the family would be important. Yeah.
And in the scenario that one has a suspicion and then one tries to speak and then finds out that there actually is an issue of domestic abuse, what should a family member do?
Okay. Call PAVE.
Call PAVE.
There's a few things that you can do. It also depends on what the survivor, for instance, wants help in. Maybe the survivor is just ready to tell someone about what has been happening, but not ready to maybe seek professional help or legal assistance. Yeah. But if you know resources, then it's good lah that you can, provide that information, to him or her. So for example, telling them that, there are centers like ours that they can approach for help. Actually, we have a lot of family members who have called us on behalf of, other family members who are experiencing violence because they are worried. Yeah. And that helps. Yeah. Because sometimes the survivors themselves feel very afraid to make that first phone call, right? Right. So if it's somebody doing that on their behalf, and then the social worker then will call the survivor and find out a bit more, that's a bit less intimidating lah. Yeah. So there's a few things lah that you can do, but don't pressurize lah the person and don't give unhelpful comments like, why you don't leave? Yeah, why are you still here? He beat you already, you still want to stay with him. Don't say all these kind of unhelpful comments lah. We don't know their situation. We are not experiencing what they're experiencing, so it's not for us to judge and give those kind of advice. Yeah.
So don't give unnecessary advice.
Yes.
But encourage them to reach out to the experts like PAVE.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, for family members, you can also offer help. If you need a place to stay. Yeah. Of course, if you have the means lah, then you can come to my place or whatever. Anytime you need help, you can call me. No matter the time of the day or whatever. So of course, all these things you can do for the survivor. If you want help, if you want me to accompany you to see a professional, I'll do that. Yeah. So providing that kind of support, that would be important.
I think that those examples are very important for people who are listening in. And we will be sharing the contact details of PAVE with this podcast. But that also leads me to the next question, which is about resources. And you've already started in that direction, so I'll just push you a little more. What are the resources available for those survivors who are either ready to reach out or are at that level where they feel that they need to reach out?
Okay.
So what are the resources and what's the process that plays out?
Okay. So number one is we always say safety first lah. Prioritize your safety. If you're in immediate danger, then call the police. Right? That's the fastest way to get help. You can also text the police. If it's not convenient to call, right, or it's not safe, you can text the police and just say what's your emergency, where you are at, and then they will come to you. So that is in terms of when you need immediate help. Yeah. And then in Singapore, we have the family service centers all around the island. So in every neighborhood, there's a few lah. So you can go down, you can make an appointment, and a social worker, counselor will speak to you and give you a little bit more advice on what you can do with your situation. Yeah. For PAVE, we are Protection Specialist Center, and then there's another 2 more centers like us. One is in the east, and then in the east, TransSafe, and then there's another one, TransSafe, and then there's Project Start.
Project Start.
Yeah. So families can also seek help from these places. If you go into the Ministry of Social and Family Development website, there's the Break the Silence campaign. They have a lot of information on violence, on the signs, on how to make a report. So it's quite comprehensive. So that's also another good resource. Yeah. Yes.
And what sort of legal protections are there for survivors?
Okay, so currently we have the Personal Protection Order and the Domestic Exclusion Order that survivors can apply, and survivors can apply on behalf of their children as well. So it protects survivors against 4 types of violence. Physical hurt, threat of harm, wrongful confinement, meaning that a person doesn't allow you to leave the house, locks you in the room for hours and hours, doesn't allow you to call for help. So that's wrongful confinement. And then continual harassment to the point of mental anguish. So that can be stalking, or it can be repeatedly calling you, asking you where you are, using all the verbal abuse, the vulgarities. So if a situation encompasses that, any one of that then a survivor can apply for a personal protection order. And they can do it at PAVE actually. They can, now you can do it online, and then you can either go to the Family Justice Court, or you can come to PAVE, and then we'll help you through the process. Yeah. The good thing about the protection order is that the court will mandate the family to receive counselling. So that means that not only the survivor would need to come to get help, but the perpetrator, the person who abused, would also be mandated to get help for his behaviours. And like what I said earlier, he's the most critical person lah. Yeah. So that's a good. We always tell this to our survivors that this is a way for the family, for everyone in the family to actually get help.
Nazima, I've learned so much from listening to you and listening about the work that PAVE does. And it makes me just think about how little awareness there is about this issue, and how little we speak about it because of various social stigmas, or we just are not comfortable about speaking about domestic abuse, even though maybe many of us may have seen it, have not experienced it. Is there something generally we can do to create more awareness of this issue? I know the great work that yourself and PAVE are doing, but is there something that people like us can do?
Number one is to educate ourselves on domestic violence. like for us to know that it's not just about physical abuse, that it's more, it extends beyond physical abuse. Yeah, and for us to know that we can play a part in helping someone else. We don't have to be the victim or the perpetrator, but if we have a loved one, or friends or family, right, who may be experiencing this, then we want to come in and see how we can help. Yeah, that's important. You know, you don't want to just be a bystander. You want to trust your gut that, you know, the family needs help. Then how can I come in and help in a way that's respectful, and also in a way that won't jeopardize the family's safety further. Yeah.
And I suspect we also need to change our kind of mental attitude towards this issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because I suspect, unfortunately, there are many more cases of domestic abuse than we think are.
Yeah,
occurring,
exactly.
right? So,
yeah. And also because, you know, like what I said at the beginning of the podcast, that domestic violence is a complex issue. It's not something that only PAVE can solve the problem. You know, we need the help of the community. We need the police. We need the schools. We need family members to support families who are vulnerable. So it's not something that one agency or one person can do on their own. Yeah.
On that note, Nazima, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And for sharing this very important insights on this topic. But also thank you for all the work you do and PAVE does. And you've listed a number of important resources and some other organizations that are working as well. And we'll provide a list of that at the end of this podcast. So thank you for joining me today. And thank you all for tuning in to Teak Talk. See you all. Goodbye. Thank you for watching our podcast. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, and spread the word.